Hello, my name is Joy, and I'm currently drafting what will hopefully become my debut novel. It is a high fantasy with a romantic subplot that I'm calling Project Phoenix. As we're entering into this new year, I really wanted to set myself up for writing success and create a set of goals and plans and strategies to finish this novel and also mature as a writer in other areas. So my writing success for 2025, obviously success is a relative term, but for me, success will simply mean meeting my goals in a way that's satisfying and being able to look back and say, okay, I grew as a writer and I was able to do what I set out to do. But this process starts now in December. I'm recording this on December 21st, and this week I want to start a Notion, which is a website that can help you to schedule things, track your goals, track your habits, that sort of thing. So I want to get that all set up at the end of December so that it's ready to go in January. And I already set up a TrackBear account, which will help me to track my word counts and set goals there as well. So between those two things, I think that will be good enough to track my progress throughout the year and kind of keep me a little bit more motivated and remind myself of what I'm working towards in the first place. Another thing that I would love to do that I think will give me another kickstart of inspiration and motivation is to actually create mood boards and vision boards for my book. I know a lot of people do this before they even begin, and I'm halfway through my first draft. I'm currently about 41,000 words in, so I'm a little bit late to the game with this. I'm surprised that I didn't do it sooner, but it's better now than never, and I think that this will kind of help me to get through what often can be like the middle slump of a book. And I'm not necessarily feeling the slump yet, but I think that it will be some good energy to bring into the new year. So that's another thing that I would love to do. So if you haven't created any sort of like a vision or mood board yet for your book, honestly, you can just search through the internet for images that you really connect with, that you think resonate with the content, with the themes, with the vibe of your book, and just put them together. You can use Canva for this. You can probably use Photoshop. You can probably just create a Pinterest board for it, whatever you want to do. But I think that creating a mood board will give me that extra oomph, that extra little bit of inspiration. And, sometimes people can use creating a mood board as procrastinating, like their actual writing. So don't do that. But I just think that it would be really fun to have next to me while I write. For this video, I'm honestly verbally processing a lot of what my goals are. So I'm going to take a lot of what I'm saying in this video and basically transfer it and put it into Notion so that it's right there for me to see every single day. But yeah, so actually getting into the writing and my writing timeline and strategy surrounding that, because that's probably what you're here for. My biggest goal for the year 2025 is to finish the first draft of this book that I've been working on. And it is actually a duology, but I want to finish the first draft of the first book. I started this back at the end of March in 2024. It's been a long process. I only really started taking it extra seriously in October, so for the last 2 months maybe. But I've decided that I really would love to get this first draft wrapped up by the end of March, so that will have been a year of working on my first draft, which is a little bit of a long time for a first draft, but to be fair, it is probably going to wind up being about 100,000 words at least of a first draft. And I was also getting back into writing after not writing for about 4 years, and I just kind of had to rediscover my voice, figure out the world, figure out the characters, and take a long time doing that. But now that I'm really in the thick of the story, I think that it will be doable to finish the first draft by the end of March in 2025. In order to do that, I'm going to need to write roughly 4,000 words every week, which is a little bit much, at least for me, because I have a very busy life. I have 2 young children, and I also have a job outside of YouTube. I run another YouTube channel, and I'm probably just honestly doing way too much in my life. I don't get enough sleep, quite frankly. This is really, really important to me. It's been my lifelong dream to be a published author, to write books, and this is the beginning of that journey for me. And sometimes to get things done, you gotta do hard things. Now, I don't think that the 4,000 words a week pace will be sustainable for me in the long term, but I do think that I can maintain it for several months in order to get to the end of March, more or less. I mean, some weeks are gonna just be less. And as far as when I'm going to write and how that's going to work, honestly, I really, really love writing, so I don't need a ton of motivation to sit down and do it. The thing that I lack the most of is consistent time. Honestly, I'm simply not the person that can sit down at the same exact time every single day and hammer out exactly 500 words every single day. Like, that's just, first of all, it's not in my personality and my temperament. I tend to be a much more like adaptive, flexible type of person. I like to have some variety in my routine, but also my life and my schedule and everything, like, it's just not consistent whatsoever. So What I do instead is sit down at the beginning of each week, generally on Sundays, and I look ahead at my schedule and I think to myself, okay, can I carve out at least 4 or 5 hours of writing time, or at least like 4 or 5 writing sessions throughout the week? And if I can do more than that, great. But I just look at the week ahead and I plan those out. I write them down. I'm like, okay, I'm going to write at this time. And that does really help to have pre-established times. Now, again, they're not the same exact time every time. I mean, I know some people that wake up really early before work and they get all of their writing done first thing in the morning, every single morning. That's not my life because heck, my kids wake up at different times. And like sometimes, my 2-year-old might wake up teething in the middle of the night, like 3 times that night. And then I'm not going to want to wake up extra early in the morning to get writing done. Like that's not going to work for me. So there's just so much unpredictability. That's just, yeah, my life is a little too crazy for that. But I do make time for it. That is essential, to make time to sit down, not just do it based on your mood, but have a predetermined time where it's like, okay, no matter what, I am going to sit down and I am going to write. And sometimes, I do persist in my writing session, even if I'm not really feeling it, because more often than not, I will reach a point 30 minutes into my writing session after really slogging through, the words not coming out right, everything honestly, frankly, being kind of painful, staring at a screen and just like putting down a few words and just being like, normally at a certain point in whatever writing session, I reach a breakthrough point and something just happens and clicks in my brain, and all of a sudden I'm able to get out way more words than I was the previous 30 minutes, 45 minutes, however long it was. So no matter what, I do try to push through. So in summary, my January, February, and March are going to be feverishly trying to finish my first draft, carving out plenty of time to write, and really being intentional with it. I don't know if this is going to be possible, but I would also love to take 1 or 2 writing retreats during that time, to even if it's just a day away, maybe a weekend away. I don't really know if I can spend that much time away from my family, but I would love to try to at least carve out some time to do that. Okay, so I get to the end of March, and ideally I'll be finishing my first draft. Now what? So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm not even going to read through the first draft yet, like at all. Like I'm not going to really touch it. The first thing I'm going to do once I write those last few words, I have a lot of notes that I've taken over the course of writing. In Scrivener, there's like a notes tab on the side. I tend to write a lot of notes there. And I also have a lot of notes on my notes app on my phone. Lots of notes everywhere, just filled to the brim with ideas and different things that I want to change. I also make a lot of highlights and I put things in brackets. I have placeholders for things where I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to restructure this in revision later, but I'm just moving on now. So I have all these notes for my second draft, for my future self, essentially. What I'm going to do once I'm done with the first draft, over the course of April, hi sir, over the course of April, I'm going to compile all of those revision notes, and I'm going to make a plan or a list of, okay, hey, these are the things that need to change in my first draft. And I'm going to categorize them by my different revision goals, starting from like big picture things to the minute details. So big picture things might look like, okay, these are developmental edits. These are plot threads that need to change. This scene might need to move to the beginning of the book, or like this idea or world building element should be placed in a different spot, or this chapter might need to be deleted altogether. Just like really big top-down vision, like big changes, right? And then from there, I might move to something a little bit more subtle where it's like, I really want to draw out these themes more. I want to find more places where I can embed these themes and ideas and world building pieces. So for example, I initially went into this book thinking that, the technology and time, I mean, it is fantasy, so it's not perfectly parallel to our world. It takes place in a completely different world from our world. It's a secondary world. However, when I first went in to write this, I sort of was envisioning just like a medieval fantasy. But the longer I've been writing it and the more I've been thinking about it, the more I think I want to make it more analogous to the 1700s in our world. I mean, not perfectly, but that's sort of what I'm thinking. And so that means I'm going to have to go through, I'm not going to change it yet. And I'm trying to keep it in mind for the rest of the first draft. I haven't gone back and revised the setting earlier in the book to make it more analogous to the 1700s. So that's a really big change, a really big world building and setting element that is going to need to be researched and adjusted and all of that. Other things outside of the setting and world building and themes would just be character arcs. I want to make notes to see, did I successfully capture this character arc for this character? Or what about this side character? Do I need to change that character arc thing? Subplots would be another element to this, where it's like, okay, did I complete that subplot or is it just left hanging for the reader? So all of those elements are also fairly big picture. And then from there, I'm obviously not going to make a list of every single metaphor that needs to be changed because it was a familiar metaphor, and every single line that needs to be changed, because that will come later in the process. But what I will do as far as revision notes go is I will try to identify some comparative books that have similar voices to what I'm looking for, or similar prose styles to what I want my book to be like. And I'll try to write those down, and I'll try to give it a little bit more thought and substance to how I want my book to read, if that makes sense. And that will be helpful when I do go back to edit on the line level later on, which will just be me combing through the manuscript after, those bigger level revisions. I'll be able to refer back to that and be like, okay, what were my goals with the prose? What were my goals with the language? And try to implement that later on. Once I've made all of my revision notes, I'm going to set that aside. I'm also going to set aside my first draft, and I'm going to start outlining / zero drafting for the second book in the duology. So over the course of the rest of April into May, I will be planning out my second book. Now, with my first book, I really didn't do a whole lot of outlining. I did a lot of like headlights style writing, where I would plan a little bit and then write that out, and then plan a little bit and write that out type of deal. And I had an overarching idea for the book, but I didn't ever really sit down and come up with a super solid outline. But for my second book, I think now that I'm really familiar with the world and the characters, and really familiar with where I want the plot to go, and a better idea of their character arcs and growth and all that sort of thing, and the themes that I want to draw out for the second book, I definitely want to go in with a little bit more of a robust outline, maybe pieces of dialogue and description, zero draft style, kind of telling the story to myself to figure it out. I want to go in more prepared. Right? So then that brings us to the end of May. Hopefully by then I will have the first draft of my first book completed. I will have my revision notes compiled in order of how I'm going to tackle them for the first book. And I will have a solid outline / zero draft, like a really quick, messy thing for my second book in the duology. And then I'm going to put it all in a drawer and not look at it for a while. I'm going to let it breathe all during the course of April and May. I'm not going to look at the first draft of my first book. And then once I'm done with kind of the outline and plotting process, as much as I can finish by the end of May, like once I'm done with that for the second book, I'm also not going to immediately dive into drafting my second book. I'm going to take a moment to breathe. At this point, we're going to be in June. I will keep writing. And the reason for this is that, in my mind, revision requires looking at your work in a completely different light, looking at it from a different angle, and I can't do that if I'm too close to being the person that I was when I initially wrote it. I need more space. I need to be able to view the work as objectively as possible. So over the course of June, another writing goal that I have is I would love to write some poetry. I would love to write maybe a handful of short stories. And if I like them enough, submit them to some literary journals. And if they get accepted, great. But if they don't, also great. I got more writing experience and it was really fun. And I think that exercising my writing muscles in a different area from this duology that I've been working on will be really, really refreshing. I still want to keep writing. I don't want to take like a complete break from it, but I won't have as much pressure to complete like this massive, massive project. I might also use this time to start brainstorming and getting excited about some potential future projects and whatever I want to work on once I'm done with this duology, because I have some ideas floating around, but I haven't really spent any time developing those ideas further. And it might be nice to have some things on the menu for me to select once I'm finished with this duology. I can be like, okay, I already have some ideas preloaded and ready to go. And that way I can kind of dive right back into writing. Then that brings us to July of 2025, and that is when I will plan to start revising. And I'll revisit my first draft again. I'll dust it off, open up that Scrivener file. It might be a little bit squeaky and rusty, but it's okay. It's going to be good for me to have had that distance. Now, a big reason that I wanted to have a complete outline of my second book in the duology is that I think that that might very well influence the revision process for the first book. That way, if there's any plot threads or things that need to happen with certain characters in the first book before it can happen in the second book, like I can kind of go back and adjust that in the first book. And there's just like so much that I probably won't know about the second book until I actually go through that outlining process and decide on the order of events and exactly what I want to happen. So, armed with the old revision notes that I had already compiled and the outline of the second book, I will tackle that first draft and I will most likely add to my revision notes and be like, ooh, I didn't know that that needed to change before, but like the pacing here is not working. This character interaction here is not working. Like I don't like these things. Once I've had some distance, I'll be able to identify those elements a lot more objectively. And hopefully, once I finish that first read through of the first draft, I will have a more complete and cohesive and comprehensive version of my revision notes, which I will use as a reference as I go through the revision process. So from July all the way to the end of the year, December 2025, I plan to be in revision mode for my first book. And I think I also like the idea of starting my first draft of the second book and kind of toggling between the two of them. I don't know for sure if that's a good idea or not, but I kind of like that idea. I think it would be fun and give myself like a little bit more variety. Also, I forgot I had this matcha latte sitting here this entire time and I haven't even taken one sip. Goodness. I was missing out. Now, I know some people tackle revision differently, but what I'm planning on doing, and I think that this is a fairly typical way to approach it, is I'll go through the entire draft and I will first revise the biggest picture elements, the big like developmental plot things, character things, theme things, all of that. I'm going to really make sure it's nice and together, tight, that sort of thing. It's where I want it to be. And then after all of that, I'll go through and make sure I replace any of the placeholders that I had. If I haven't decided on a city name of a random city and I just used bracket, city, bracket, or whatever, I will like actually finally decide on what that is and go through and replace all of those. I will also start to go through on a line level and polish the prose, make sure things flow well and are where I want them to be. So that will be probably like the second or third run through of my draft. I mean, at some point in the process, I haven't decided exactly when, but I would love to have beta readers take a look at the project. That might be after, I feel like I wouldn't want to share it with anyone till after I've taken the time to polish the prose, just because like having placeholders all over the place might be like a little bit embarrassing, but that's just me. I don't actually know what the typical protocol is regarding that. So let me know, like what point in the process do you have beta readers look at your book and give you feedback? Then once I've had beta readers look at it, I'll proofread it again and incorporate that feedback. And then, I mean, I don't know if it'll be finished by that point. I haven't decided actually if I plan on attempting to traditionally publish this or self-publish this. I'll most likely decide that over the course of next year as well, but I don't know yet. I mean, I would love to have a fairly finished first book in the duology by the end of the year. That might be a little bit ambitious. I don't really know, but that would be my ideal. And as for drafting the second book, I don't know if I feel entirely comfortable having like a specific goal for that. In my mind, any words that I get into the first draft of the second book are a win. Like that would be fantastic, but I also don't want to set myself up for disappointment. So wow, that is my general timeline as far as writing and books go. But I do want to discuss some of the activities that I'll do outside of writing in order to support my writing. The number one, big one, is keep reading. I mean, this is very popular and trite advice, but genuinely, like reading is one of the best things that you can do to improve your writing. I went through a bit of a reading drought for a while after having my kids. I was only reading maybe like 10 books a year at the most, which I know for some people is like good. Like it was good. I was still reading. It was so nowhere near like what I used to read, like that level where I used to read So, but it was so nowhere near how I used to read. This year, actually, I got a Kindle last Christmas of 2023. I was able to read 52 books this year, which for some people isn't that much, but for me, that was a really good number. That works out to roughly a book a week. I was able to have enough margin and space in my life where I wasn't feeling like all of this pressure to read so many books. It gave me enough time to write. It gave me enough time to live my life, but it satisfied my need to ingest other stories, and it really helped me. So, and actually the goal that I'd set myself was only 36 books, but I did surpass that at 52 books. However, I don't know that I would do much more than 52 books, maybe 60 books in a year, but I don't think I want to set a goal of more than 52 books because I think that was honestly a really good number. However, I think I do want to adjust my reading habits because this year I very much just kind of like read what I wanted to, very much a mood reader. I was just like, yeah, I'll just pick up that book. And, you know, I have a big backlog on my Libby of all the books that I have holds on and things that I'm interested in that I've heard about on the internet here and there and recommendations from people. So it was very like lackadaisical, and there's literally nothing wrong with that. But if I'm wanting to be more intentional about using my reading to support my writing, that means I need to be more intentional about the books that I'm selecting to read and spending my time reading, if that makes sense. So I will still absolutely be reading just for fun and be reading things that like why not? I want to read that one random book that everyone's talking about or whatever. Like obviously I'm going to still do that, but I do want to incorporate books, I guess, into my reading diet that will be helpful for this duology that I'm writing. So this duology is high fantasy and it has a romantic subplot. I haven't completely nailed down my voice. Obviously, like that is very personal to me, but it's not like I've sat down and strategized like, okay, like this is how flowery or direct I want my prose to be, for example. Obviously, it's going to come out the way that it comes out. I found that certain books have more influence on my writing. I think this is called like vocal training, where you're reading books that have a similar voice to what you want to write. And I think that this is really helpful. I want to identify books that when I read them, they impact my writing in a favorable way, in a way that I like. And I do want to explore the fantasy genre a little bit more. I mean, most of what I read is fantasy, but I think that I want to go back and read some of the classic fantasy books that I never read, like Wheel of Time. And I want to read, I don't know, Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I just never really read those ones. I think that will be helpful for me, especially since I am writing in high fantasy. I want to see what has been done before. Kind of going back to like the vocal training piece, I'm trying to think of which authors I've read this year that I really love their voice. I think, who wrote Priory of the Orange Tree? I really liked that one. Samantha Shannon. So Priory of the Orange Tree, I think, had a really great voice. That was Samantha Shannon. I loved her prose in that. And I also really love Rebecca Ross's work. I know she has a lot of YA, but I don't feel like she has that distinct YA voice that some authors have. Like, I feel like her prose is a lot more nuanced and delicate. I mean, I love the figurative language that she uses. So, you know, Rebecca Ross, she wrote Divine Rivals, and like I really enjoyed the prose in that book, and I could see myself wanting to replicate something similar to that. So yeah, between Samantha Shannon and Rebecca Ross and maybe some other writers that aren't coming to mind right now, like those are some voices, I guess, and styles I enjoy. And then aside from that, I do want to do more research into writing craft itself. I read a lot of craft books while I was a creative writing major in college. So I have some of my favorites here, actually. Honestly, one of my favorite books about writing is The Writing Life by Annie Dillard. So I might reread this book. It's such a beautiful take on what it means to be a writer and what writing feels like. I mean, it's just beautiful. But I actually did order some writing craft books off of thrift books, and I would love to go through some of those and just remind myself and relearn some of the things that, you know, have been a little bit rusty. Honestly, the best way to learn to write is probably to actually write and to read. But secondary to that, getting tips from craft books are also great. And even if I just have them on hand to reference all the time, that would be great. And then lastly, another thing that I want to read more of, I want to read, especially if I do decide to go with like the 1700s world building element, I want to read some books that were written in the 1700s and maybe some like firsthand accounts of the 1700s. I want to read some of the diaries of Samuel Pepys or something like that, where like he has some of the best firsthand accounts of like what living in the 1600s was like. And so like that's kind of close to the 1700s, I guess. I want to read, like maybe reread Moll Flanders. I already own that book and I read it in college, but that takes place in the 1700s. Same for like Gulliver's Travels, stuff like that. I just want to immerse myself a little bit in the literature of that time, not to imitate their voice as much as I want to get an idea of what everyday life was maybe like and maybe get some world building ideas from that. And then outside of writing, I think it's so important to have something outside of reading and writing, like a hobby or an activity that puts you back in your body, if that makes sense. Because writing and reading are such cerebral activities and they take up so much of like your creative soul and so much of your mind. I need something outside of that to re-engage my body and to get me living again, like living life. Because I personally find it hard to write about life if I'm not living my life. And so for me, I think that this year it's primarily going to be running. I mean, I'm a girl with a million hobbies, so like you'll catch me doing a lot of things. But for me, that's going to be running. And honestly, like I'm telling you guys, I come up with my best writing ideas while I'm running. I mean, maybe it's just the fact that like I'm doing a really repetitive bodily activity, so my brain can just like wander. And, you know, my blood is pumping. I'm outside generally when I'm running. So I'm observing things around me. I'm usually listening to like fantasy music too. So that also helps. And I'm able to just kind of daydream about my book and my characters and come up with really fun ideas. And some of them like don't go anywhere, but it's so helpful for me in that ideation process. But for you, that might look like crochet or ceramics. Like those are both very like hands-on activities. And they tend to be, at least crochet tends to be very repetitive with the stitches that you're doing and that sort of thing. So, you know, that is really conducive to letting your mind wander. Or it could be, you know, just being out in nature. It could be hiking, it could be walking. I don't know about playing a sport, but maybe that would be fine too, especially if it's maybe a more solitary sport like kayaking or I don't know, skiing or something. But yeah, for me, that's going to be running. I want to continue running and that's a big priority for me. I'm not like a huge runner. I'm not running like 30, 40, 50 miles a week. I mean, there are people that do that. I am not doing that. I'm more so running like 10 to 15 miles a week, which is just enough for me to, you know, get plenty of exercise and fitness, but also like lots of time to think about my book. But yeah, overall, I definitely personally recommend finding a relatively mindless activity, especially one that's engaging your body, so that you can let your mind wander and you can daydream while doing it. And I feel like that sets you up for success with writing and supports your writing in an indirect way. And try to not feel guilty about using your free time to do something other than writing. I know sometimes people start to feel that way, but no, like don't resist that urge. It is so valuable to take time and space away from writing. It's equally valuable to show up and be present with your writing. Yes, of course, you know, but like if you're feeling guilt over not showing up all the time, or if you're feeling guilt about trying something different, no, do not. And I'm telling that to myself as much as I'm telling it to you. So yeah, that's an overview of what I'm going to try to do in 2025. That's my writing timeline. Those are my strategies. Those are my goals, all of that. And I really hope that it works out because I plan to return this time next year to review how it went and see if I actually met my goals. I guess another like little goal that I had was to start this YouTube channel, which I just did, and I would love to continue making videos. I think that it will be a helpful tool to hold me accountable to these goals and to also build a community surrounding the things that I love, like reading and writing. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Let me know in the comments down below what your specific goals are. What stage are you at in the writing process? Are you brainstorming? Are you writing your first draft? Are you revising? Where are you at right now? If you like this video, please feel free to leave a like or subscribe. That would be super helpful for my channel, and I hope that you have a great day and that your writing goes well and that you meet all of your goals for 2025. Bye!